Hello, this is Deborah Clay, author of The Borrowed Boy and Just Be, and presenter of Castaway Books. Each week I invite one of my favourite authors to tell me about the books which have inspired their life and influenced their writing. This week I'm talking to Giovanni Chikira. I'm delighted to welcome Giovanni Chikira to my Castaway Island today. and Giovanni also writes under the name of Rhoda Baxter, so you may have come across her novels through that name. In fact, as Rhoda Baxter, Giovanni's published 10 books, and as Giovanni Chikira, 3 books, most recent, A Convenient Marriage. But it was Christmas at the Palace that I read most recently and absolutely enjoyed, because I read it or had it on audio books while I was baking for Christmas. So it was wonderful.
Oh, perfect. The lady who did the audio was amazing. She did all the accents. She was great.
She was. She brought it to life as if I was watching it on a television, you know? I could picture the characters. Oh, she was wonderful. Yes.
Yeah, she was great.
Story. It's a lovely, lovely story. So I have to read all your books by Rhoda Baxter as well. Falling in love with acting. So you've had a very interesting life, and I'm really looking forward to this interview. But we shall start with book number 1.
Okay, for book number 1, I chose 5 on a Treasure Island by Ian Blyton. I mean, really, it's all of the famous 5 books, but I chose that one as the gateway drug for the famous 5 books.
I'm glad you chose that one. Of all the famous 5 books, that's my favourite, and I can remember the story to this day. So, what was it you loved about it, and what was going on in your life at that time?
So I grew up all over the place. I was born in England, but my dad is an engineer. He's a civil engineer, and he did roads and dams and various things. So we moved around a bit, lived in Nigeria for a bit, and then most of my life, though, I was in Sri Lanka as a child. So I was living in Colombo, and I really can't remember when I started reading the famous 5 books, but I just read any that I could get my hands on. And then nearly 40 years later, I read them again to my daughter, the updated versions, and she loved them. So, yeah, we were both quite taken with George, I think. George speaks to the proto-feminist in us all, who, you know, gets really annoyed when you're told you can't do these things because you're a girl.
Absolutely. I heard that they'd been updated. Did they change much? I mean, how did they update? Was it cultural references? Brought it up to be more contemporary?
Yeah, it was. I mean, they're basically the same as far as I can recall, because it's a long time since I read the originals. But they changed some of the more the culturally inappropriate things, the racist bits, the anti-Semitic bits, those bits. Occasionally you can see the join where they've tried to change things. But mostly I didn't even really notice the change, because when I read them as a child, I didn't notice the things that were wrong with them, simply because I wasn't aware of them, as it were.
Yeah, it's interesting. Sometimes it feels as if, as a society, we haven't moved forward in terms of attitudes, and sometimes, you know, you feel like we've taken a step back. But then when you watch films, recently a couple of films that I've watched, and I've thought, whoa, I didn't pick up on that when I watched it all those years ago. That used to be not acceptable now. It's weird, isn't it?
No. Yeah, I mean, I tried to read. I remembered having read Dr. Dolittle as a child. So I got a copy of it, started reading it, got up out loud to my daughter, occasionally editing as I went, and I just couldn't. It was just too racist. Obviously, when I was like 8 or 9, it just went straight over my head. But now I'm just like, I just can't, in good conscience, read this.
Oh, absolutely. I remember there was an awful, awful sitcom on the TV called Bless Thy Neighbour. Do you remember that?
Not seen that one.
No, you wouldn't want to see it, because it was absolutely outright racist. It was about a black family living next door to a white family, and all the jokes were racist jokes. And it was a popular sitcom in the 1960s. So,
yeah,
we've moved on.
Different times. Yeah.
But you know, I'm thinking in films, it's also how women are depicted. I was watching Working Girl, that wonderful one with Melanie Griffiths, you know, and Harrison Ford. Do you know it?
I think I've seen it, but a long time ago. So
Secretary, and she impersonates her boss so that she can get through the glass ceiling.
right.
But there's a scene where she is hoovering the house, the flat, getting it ready, and she happens to be wearing high heels, skimpy knickers, and nothing on top. Like women really go around
As you do.
high heels, naked, apart from
Yeah.
knickers? No.
Yes. Yeah. That's just asking for a broken ankle, really.
And it's been written by a man, hasn't it, to say, let's put in this sexy scene to sell it. Anyway, don't get me started. I think we have moved on a little bit, I like to think. A little bit.
One hopes, yeah, a little bit.
Tiny bit. But I get the bit about the tomboyish, and you and your daughter both identifying with George. Especially, perhaps not so much now, but certainly when I was reading it, when I would be a child in the 60s, there were very different attitudes towards women and what girls could do then.
Yeah, I mean, Sri Lanka in the 80s as well, fairly traditional. Yeah, I didn't like to wear dresses, and that was a problem. So I just lived in shorts, apart from when we had guests that I had a dress on. Otherwise, shorts and t-shirt, just like my brother. Yeah.
Okay, so on to your second book.
My second book, I chose Mort by Terry Pratchett. Again, I love Terry Pratchett. I've got the whole of the Discworld series. I've been rereading them. They're my go-to comfort read. And I got into reading them when I moved, when I was 16. Yeah. We moved back to England, to Yorkshire. So I'd gone from very conservative Colombo all-girls school to Yorkshire, sixth form. It was a bit of a culture shock, but it was fine. So I discovered the library there, in Halifax, and I discovered Terry Pratchett. And the reason I picked Mort was because my physics teacher, who was also a Terry Pratchett fan, gave me a leaflet for a book signing where Terry Pratchett was going to be signing these books. And it's the first time I'd met an author in real life. I queued in the rain with my dad, and I went and I got my book signed, and I was coming out and I saw my physics teacher also in the rain waiting to get his book signed. And it was an introduction to this world that Terry Pratchett created. And it was funny, it had science jokes in it, it made you laugh, and then it made you think. And yeah, I love it, and it's something that I feel quite strongly about: humor and seriousness not being things that you have to keep apart.
I haven't read those books, I must admit. But so do you think meeting an author as a child, that gave you the inspiration or the feeling that you could be an author?
I've always wanted to be an author as long as I can remember. I mean, I read, I was an early reader. My mum taught me to read when we were living in Nigeria. And yeah, so I've read everything I could get my hands on right throughout my childhood. Somewhere around age 9, 10-ish, I realized that Enid Blyton was dead and her books were still there. And I thought, ooh, that's interesting. You know, this was written by a real person. And from then on, I think author became something I wanted to do. And when I was choosing my O-levels, my GCSEs, I suppose, I said, I want to do English. I was good at it. And my parents said, oh, I don't know, you're also good at science, do science, and then get a real job, and then you can do the English and the writing as a sideline, which essentially is what I ended up doing. So yeah, so they were right, which is annoying, but there you go.
It means, though, through having your career and your academic background and experience, you can bring so much more into your storytelling. If you just had a life that was just about pursuing a life as an author, you wouldn't have got all the richness that you can bring into your work.
That's true. I think you have to have something to write about, And I think as a young person, I didn't really appreciate that. But now I do. So yeah, I quite like doing a bit of both.
You were saying, because you sent me, we did a bit of a briefing before we had this, so we have had a little bit of a chat. But you were saying that when you were younger, you used to go to the library, or you were allowed one book from the school library, and your mum took you to the library. And I
yes,
going to the library, because that feeling about to choose any book you want from those shelves, I still get excited thinking about it.
Yes, because you swap by choice and it's free. It's amazing. Yeah, my school library, we used to have, when I was in the junior school, because the school was one that had an upper school and a lower school. So when I was in the lower school, I went up to the librarian and I said, these books are all really babyish. I read most of these. Can I have, bigger books? And she said, so she picked up, I don't know, like a Hardy Boys book or something, and said, here you go. Read me the first page of that. So I just read it to her. And she said, okay, you're clearly a proficient reader. So I was allowed to take the big children's books. So the young adult stuff, when I was like 10. There was me and another girl who were still friends. And so we used to borrow those books, one book a week. And we were in the same class and we'd swap midway through the week and then swap back so we could return it. The Colombo Central Library was opposite where I went for brownies. So once a week, before brownies, Mum would take me to the library. They used to have like a big yellow line to lead you to the children's library as opposed to the adult library. I do remember walking along the yellow
line. Oh, wonderful. And the other thing I was going to say is that in my book club, where we talk about books we've read in my local area, I remember several years ago, one woman said that she loved Famous Five so much as a child and as an adult, and she was a mature adult, probably in her 60s. She said, when I read a book, I'm always looking to get the same joy I get as an adult when I read a book as I did when I read the Famous Five. So when I write, I think of her as my ideal reader. So write something that's satisfying and page turning and
yeah. Well, with the Famous Five, you're pretty much into the action by the end of chapter 1,
Yeah.
When I read them back to my daughter, I was partly, with my writer hat on, I was noticing these things, and it's a lot to do with the dialogue, and there's very little sort of description in it.
Right. I've not read them for so long.
They're not bad. They stand the test.
So when you were reading Cherry Pratchett, you were at school then, and this teacher, he really did you a favour, really, didn't he, by talking to you about authors and encouraging you to this book signing. And were you good at science? You enjoyed it, but you were good at it as well?
Yeah. Good enough to go to university and do a PhD in it. So yeah.
Okay, and you went into the sixth form there. Okay, yeah. So going on to your third book.
The third book is called "It's the House in Norham Gardens" by Penelope Lively. I bought the book entirely because of the title. So I went to university. I went to Oxford. I did a 4-year course. And most people do a 3-year course, and most of my friends were finishing their 3 years and they were going off. So I had to apply to college to find a place to live if I wanted to live in college for my 4th year. And I got allocated a house, and I looked at all the other people who were allocated to the house with me, and I thought, I'm not going to fit in. I had chronic imposter syndrome anyway, right? So northern person who'd gone down to Oxford, and I was Asian and female and all of those things, and the people that I'd been put in the house with, they were all privately educated, quite beautiful people, and I was not. And I thought, no, I don't think I can cope with that. So I applied to live in this hostel, which was run by the Convent of the Sacred Heart, and it's quite difficult to get in because it's a community. They are careful to make sure they have a mix of people, different races, different religions, different outlooks. And I was lucky enough to get in. And it was called The Nunnery. and it was in Norham Gardens. It wasn't called the nunnery, we called it the nunnery. The sisters just called it the Convent of the Sacred Heart, or home, I guess, but you know. So there were 25 students and 5 sisters who lived there. And I lived there throughout my PhD as well. It was the most amazing place because of the mix of people. People came from all over the world, and as I say, all religions and all sorts of different subjects that we were studying and a range of ages. And I met my husband there, so we like to joke that we met in a nunnery.
What was he doing there? Was he just staying there as well? Staying there as well?
Yeah, well, he was a student as well. He was in the year above me. He was doing chemistry, and yeah, we just met in the kitchen. The kitchen was like the social hub. It was. It had these 2 industrial cookers and a huge table that sat about 18 to 24 if you were squeezing up. And people were in and out all the time, and that's pretty much where you went. If you wanted to talk to somebody, you just make yourself a cup of tea, sit down in the kitchen, somebody will show up.
No.
So yeah,
It can be a lovely community to be part of, like being a big family.
yeah, it was. It really was. And there's something about eating together. Because, like I say, you sat in the kitchen. You'd be sitting there having your dinner, and somebody else would bring their dinner, and then you'd just chat like, "How was your day?" Whatever. There's something about communal eating that's very nice, and it's very bonding for everybody.
You didn't all create one meal for everybody to eat. Then you all made your separate meals, did you?
Yeah, we did. I mean, we had communal meals once a term. That was part of the deal. You had to be an active part of the community. So we got the sisters would prop a little rota, and you'd sign up to either like chop vegetables or wash up or actually do the cooking. So yeah, we had different sorts of meals, and we'd have like we had Colombia Day one day where one of the Colombian guys orchestrated the meal, and we all cooked, but you know, and then we had Bastille Day, various things, and yeah, obviously Christmas and Lent and stuff like that as well. So.
I think that nunnery took the most beautiful people.
Oh, thank you. It was wonderful. It was such a privilege to live there and to meet all these people. And things like when 9/11 happened, I was living there, and I just remember all of us. I mean, that's what 25 people plus partners if they happen to be around. All of us crammed into this room watching it happen with the 2 Americans that were living there, and we were just like, "How can we comfort you?" Yeah, and stuff like that. And it was one of those that could be a very lonely experience, and it wasn't because we were all in there together.
Mm-hmm. Have you stayed in touch with many of them apart from your husband?
Apart from husband, yeah, yeah, a few of them. In fact, we were supposed to go to Germany to meet up with some friends from there, but then COVID happened and we had to cancel our trip.
Shame, because it must be lovely that you and your husband can share those memories and friendships for years.
Yes, yes.
And how amazing that you were living in Norham Gardens and you read a book called The House in Norham Gardens.
I think it's the only book we have 2 copies of, because my husband also bought a copy when he moved in.
How did you know about this book? Is it? Maybe it's a really well-known book. I just hadn't heard of it before. I mean, how was your attention brought to the book?
I think possibly just Google. I had read some Penelope Lively books before. The Ghost of Thomas Kemp I've read, and Moon Tiger. But yeah, it was just one of those things that when I went to Norham Gardens anyway, yeah. Norham Gardens is a lovely place. It's very North Oxford. Beautiful old houses, like tall Georgian houses, and it's on the other side of the university parks to the science block. So I used to walk across the park to get to work in the morning, which was really nice.
Loads of material there for writing, about the communal living, about Oxford University. I'm sure these things come up in your stories.
I think they do. Different books have different aspects of it. There's one of my books, Still Having a Ball. The house in that book is basically Norham Gardens. And I wrote a blog post about it. And the house doesn't belong to Sisters anymore. They sold it to St. Bernard's Hall, and it's a accommodation and conference block now. And the warden there had found my blog post and she emailed me and she said, I read your book because I was nosy, and you had mentioned these World War II blackout blinds in the front room, and I went to see if they're still there. She said, I didn't think you would have made something like that up, so I went to check, and they are still there, but she didn't know about them until she read my book.
And which novel was that one?
A Girl Having a Ball.
Right.
It's one of the Rhoda Baxter ones, one of the earlier ones.
Excellent, excellent. Have to find
Yeah,
out.
they had big, thick wooden blackout blinds that we put up, and we once had a disco in that room. And just to save the noise bothering the neighbours, we put these blackout blinds up, and because they were thick and they were wood, they absorbed most of the noise as well.
Excellent. That's a really interesting story. So we're going on to book 4, I think, now, aren't we?
Book 4, The Man Who Ate Everything by Jeffrey Steingarten. It's a collection of essays written by the food critic for Vogue. So Jeffrey Steingarten is a lawyer turned food critic. And it combines food, which I really like. I learned to cook when basically living in the nunnery, but I learned to cook after I left home, so when I was at university. And The Man Who Ate Everything is a combination of a little bit of science, a little bit of humor, a little bit of food, and it's just perfect. I've read it so many times. It's very funny.
Excellent. So what did you do with your science degree? You did microbiology and your PhD, so what was the work that you did?
So I was working on chemotaxis on a bacterium called Rhodobacter, which is why when I needed a pen name, I called myself Rhoda Baxter.
Oh.
So yeah, named after my bacteria. I was working on chemotaxis, so it was how the bacteria sense that they're going in the right direction for their food. Mm-hmm. So that was basically, I had a tiny part in that to look at. I finished my degree and then my PhD, and then I got to the end and I thought that academia wasn't really for me. I liked the science, I was good at it, but it didn't grip me. You need to be really into it to become an academic, devote your life to it. So I thought I would look at patent law, which was one of the ways that I could go. It was either that or science journalism, if I wanted to stay connected to the science. So I got a job as a patent searcher. It was meant to be a stepping stone to becoming a patent attorney, but I actually really liked that job. And so I ended up, by degrees, going into intellectual property and technology transfer. So I worked in University of Oxford spin out for a bit as one of their IP people. And it's perfect for me because I've got a bit of a magpie brain. I like being interested in bits of things. So I would be able to be in touch with real cutting edge science, but I don't have to actually be in the lab doing it. I can just go, wow, isn't this cool, and get excited about it, and look at protecting it patent-wise, and also where it could go, and trying to predict what we could do with it, trying to think of ways to bring it to market, partners, that kind of thing. So I ended up in university technology transfer for many years. About 10 years ago, we moved up to Hull because my husband got a job, and then I got a job at the University of Hull doing IP. So I've been doing sort of that side of things for a while now. I'm freelance now, and lets me dabble in the science.
It's interesting you were doing intellectual property rights. That must be really helpful to you because you're a hybrid author and you've done some self-indie publishing as well as traditional publisher. So did that help you with your contracts?
Yes and no. I've worked with many publishers now, 4. Yeah. Most of them are small publishers and one big publisher. And it's been variable. But I signed a bad contract at one point. I knew it was a bad contract because I'd read enough contracts to look at it and go, ooh. If I was advising somebody, I would tell them, no, this is not a good idea. But, you want your book on the shelves, right? I didn't have an agent at the time. So my first 6 contracts, I suppose, were signed without an agent. And you want your book on the shelves and, somebody says, take it or leave it, you take it, right? And that's what I did. And I regretted that because, yeah, it didn't work out. And looking back, the warning signs were all there, but I was just so starry-eyed. I wanted my publication deal. So because of that, I've now become quite vocal and like trying to help people look at their contracts. So I wrote a book called Getting Published is Just the Beginning, which is all about the publishing industry. So it talks about, it's looking at it from an IP rights perspective. And it talks about what's in a publishing contract, what to expect when you're dealing with a publisher, what to expect when you're dealing with an agent, what to expect when you're self-publishing, pros and cons, that kind of thing. There's quite a lot about contracts. So I've actually done a contracts checklist for anybody who wants it. It's on rhodabaxter.com/contracts checklist. And it's questions to ask.
Oh, Giovanni, when you, after we finish this interview, perhaps you'll send me a link or just write that, because
yeah,
write your books of choice so that people can find them, and then I'll add in that reference as well, because I'm sure people would be glad of that. Very helpful.
Yeah, I found that I still do. Occasionally people email me going, I've got this weird clause that I'm talking to a publisher about, and I don't have an agent. What does it mean? Yeah, because the Society of Authors does a contract vetting service, and Alliance of Independent Authors, they have a contract vetting service. So if you're a member of either of those organizations, you can use them. But sometimes they will give you perfectly correct information, but if you don't have the vocabulary to understand what they're talking about, that doesn't make much sense to you, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, that's really helpful. Well, what was a bad experience for you has led to be really good for everybody else, because you've learned from it and are passing on the learning. So thank you.
Yes, yeah. I think it's always been done before, but slowly, and people would kind of quietly advise each other.
All right, fine. Okay. So then we go on to book 5.
Yeah, Funny Boy by Shyam Selvadurai. So it's a coming out story set in the sort of 80s Colombo, but it's set also during the riots in 1983. So I remember the riots only very vaguely. I was 8, and I'm Sinhalese, so the Tamil people got the worst of it. So I'm relatively insulated from it. But reading the book gave me a whole different perspective, I guess, or better understanding of what it was like. But also, more than that, I love Shyam Selvadurai writing, because it's so clear. It's like the images just drop into your head, bypass your thought processes and go straight into your brain. And the voice was lovely, and it's just a really, really nice book. It also made me think, oh, actually, you can have books about people who look like me. I think it was impressionable age as well at that when I read it, and I was just finishing. I was just going into real work, and I was starting to read in earnest again, because I'd had paused reading or slowed down a lot while I was at university, and certainly stopped writing. So I was picking up the writing again as well, and A Convenient Marriage, well, the book that became A Convenient Marriage, was the book that was my first idea. And that had been cooking while I was doing my PhD, because I was busy, doing a PhD. And I wanted to write it, so I was just getting back into the creative writing and things like that. And I read this book and I thought, I really could write this book the way I want to write it. So I did, and it took me 3 years to write it. And then it took me another, 2003, another 13 years nearly to get it to a publication. So
that's the recent one you've published.
That's the most recent one. So it came out, it was my, sorry, I need to count now how many books. It was my 7th traditionally published book, I think. But it was the first book I wrote.
Oh, excellent. I think that's one I've got to read. Must have to be my next one to read. I have visited only for one day. I have to say, I've been to Colombo in Sri Lanka on a
Mhm.
one-day excursion on a cruise. I couldn't
Oh,
no Sri Lanka. I
nice.
enjoyed my day there very much. There were two couple of things that are particular note, and I was trying to find the names of them to share it with you, and I could not find it. But it's more of an image I remember. There was a hotel we went to, which apparently was one that was very famous and was very smart, and in the British colonial days, but it had gone a bit to rack and ruin. Does it ring a bell? It's in a square. No, no,
Oh, is it the one that's near the big green next to Golface Green?
yes, yes, I think so.
Yeah, I know the one you mean. Yeah.
There was a house on the left as we were going towards it. It was in front of us, this hotel. And the house on the left, there was a story about how there were the families, their relationship. There was a romantic thing that was going on, and it was a wonderful story. And the result of it was that the house never was handed down to anybody, and so had just been left. And I made note
Oh,
at the time because I thought, gosh, there's a really good story here. And when you make notes on things, you think, I'll write about this one day. You can never find
yeah.
the notes, and you can't find the information anymore. Hoping you'll go, oh yes, I know all about that. But it was a wonderful story around it. Yeah.
Yeah, there's some amazing places, colonial places. But yeah, I think I know the hotel you mean. I've
And
forgotten what it's called, which is really bad,
uh,
but it's very famous.
lovely temple and beautiful town halls. So yeah, it was beautiful. Enjoyed it. Lots of history.
Yeah, I went to school up near my school was near the town hall.
Oh, right. Okay. Oh, I wish I'd known I'd met you before then, and then I could look for the library as well, couldn't I?
That's true.
So that was then. And so what were you doing at that time? You were living in Didcot at that time, yeah?
Yes, we got married and we moved to Didcot because we couldn't afford to live in Oxford, and I was commuting to London at the time, and Didcot was there's a railway station that was pretty much what Didcot's known for, that and a power station. Yeah, it was a interesting time. We had a couple of redundancies. Yeah, we had children. So yeah, our very sort of early married together life was in Didcot, and then we moved to Hull. Like I say, about 10 years ago, which was a big upheaval because all of our friend groups are down there. But then my mum lives in West Yorkshire, or lived in West Yorkshire. She lives near us now. So yeah, so coming back to Yorkshire was good. And I think the children are growing up northern, which is fun because their dad's from Devon. And I think it was a good move for us because I think the children have a much more I don't know, more free and easy life here. There's more space. People are friendlier.
Accents then. They have northern.
Pardon?
Do they have northern accents? Your children?
Yes, yeah, they do.
I bet your mum's
Yes.
strange.
Well, my mum trained as a nurse in Lancashire, so she's actually got a Lancashire accent. Our family is just from all over the place. My mum's got a Lancashire accent. Dad's got mostly a Sri Lankan accent. My brother's got West Yorkshire accent, and I've got this sort of non-accent from being all over the place.
Excellent. And you're such a prolific writer. I'm impressed by how many books you've written. And now you work freelance. I guess you can work it around to balance out the writing and the work. But how did you manage to find the time to write all those books and have a successful career?
Well, finding the time to write the books. When I was getting back into creative writing, I did there used to be a site called Get Writing on the BBC, and they used to do these prompts. So at 8 o'clock, they'd put up a prompt, and by 9:30, you had to write a short story and post it. So I used to do that every night after work, and that was my kind of winding down. And it kind of got me into the habit of sitting down at 8 o'clock to write. And then, so I used to do that after work. I would Get Writing closed down, but and I stopped doing the Flash stuff and started doing my book. But yeah, I'd sit down, start writing at 8 till 10 every night. And if you do that for long enough, you end up with a book.
Absolutely. It's really good to yeah.
Yeah. So it's just writing it, just chipping away at it a little bit at a time. My first book took me 3 years to write, because your first book teaches you how to write a book and then how to edit it. My second book took a year, and then I joined the Romantic Novelist Association, where writing a book a year is pretty much what you have to do. They have a new writer scheme, and I went through the new writer scheme, and you pay every year to have your book critiqued, and you think, well, if I'm paying for it, I'm going to produce a book for them to critique. So yes, that got me again into the kind of writing a book a year was a normal thing for everybody else, so it became a normal thing for me. And yeah, new writer scheme, I can't recommend it highly enough. It's amazing. So I graduated from the new writer scheme with the book that became Girl on the Run, which is it went through one publisher, got the rights back, went through another publisher, and I've just got the rights back now. So yeah, that was my first Rhoda Baxter book.
I dropped my pages. Was that book 5 we were talking about just now?
We've just spoken about book 5, yeah.
5, okay. That's great. So the Smart Girls series are not available at the moment, you were saying, because of you're changing who's the publisher. So they're coming.
Yeah, so the rights have just come back to me for 2 of those. I think Girl in Trouble is I self-published, so just finish off series. That's still up, but the other 2, I'll get them back up at some point. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, fascinating talking to you. Lots to learn from you, and I'm really interested in your book about what happens after getting published. I can't remember what it was called.
It's called Getting Published is just the beginning.
Absolutely.
Because often we spend so much time honing your submissions package, you don't really think about what happens after. What are you expected to do? Do you want an agent? Do you need an agent? All of these things.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I signed my first few contracts without an agent, and I know lots of people who have done that, because there's more publishers now who take direct submissions.
So do you recommend getting an agent even if you're going with a small independent publisher?
It depends what you want. You don't need an agent, but sometimes it's nice to have. I like having an agent, so mainly just stops me going a bit mad and paranoid. Because writer brain, you think worst case scenario, what's the worst that can happen? And your writer brain will give you like 10 different options. All of these things could go wrong. Because that's what we train ourselves to do, right? Yeah. Think of all the different options.
That's true. Oh, excellent. Well, I've got one more question to ask you, and that is, which luxury will you have with you on this island? Given that all writers are going to ask for books and pens and writing, you've got all the books, all the writing materials. So what would be your luxury other than the reading and the writing?
Toblerone.
Specific.
I mean, I'll send for other chocolate, but Toblerone.
That's a good one. Great big Toblerone bar. As many Toblerone bars as you can have.
Yeah, keep you fueled while you're writing.
You might come back a bit fat, but
I mean, if you're on a desert island, who's going to see you anyway?
Yeah, I got my lockdown hair. We've got our lockdown pictures. We've now got to get ready to go out again.
Oh, I know, it's terrifying.
Well, I really enjoyed talking to you, and thank you very much. So, look forward to when the next book out.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed listening to this week's episode of Castaway Books. References for all of the books discussed in this show can be found on my website, which is www.abrahkdeborah.wordpress.com. It's the letter K and then my name, Deborah. Deborah. So until next week, goodbye.